Welcome, everybody. My name is Jason Parker. Most of you are here tonight because you either listen to the radio show or the podcast that we do in Seattle. It's on 8:20 a.m. on Saturdays, Saturday afternoon, actually, about 12:30 in the afternoon. Or the show's also rebroadcast Sunday afternoons around 4 p.m. The podcast, of course, is how we have relationships with so many people around the country. So if you're a podcast listener, thank you for being here. This is a really special event that we have tonight. My friend Richard Tizzano, I'll hold up his book. You guys can see it. He's right here in Paulsbo, not too far from where my office is. But he wrote the book Accidental Safari. He's been a good friend of mine for a long time. And he's somebody that we refer a lot of people to when it comes to elder law issues and estate planning. And of course, we had him on the podcast not too long ago. The show is a big hit. We had a lot of people interested in what he had to say. And he's agreed to give a presentation tonight to help people understand long-term care planning. November is National Long-Term Care Awareness Month. So we're going to bring him on to kind of share his perspective on planning for long-term care. My friend Dean, my mentor Dean, used to say to me, he said, Jason, one mama can take care of 8 babies, but 8 babies can't take care of one mama. And boy, there's a lot of truth to that when it comes to long-term care. The question and answers, we want you to be typing questions as we go. So what happens sometimes is when people are speaking, we'll get an idea, and then if we're not writing it down, if we're not writing the question, it slips out of our mind and we forget what it was. So feel free to type your question as we go. Just know that we won't necessarily be answering the question until the very end of our presentation, and Richard has agreed to stick around and do a Q&A with everybody. So again, just want to thank you so much for being here. Richard is actually in my office, so we're going to do a swap, and he's going to move into my position, and then I'm going to hand over the PowerPoint presentation so that he can start teaching you guys all about long-term care from an elder laws attorney's perspective. So with that, Richard Tizzano, if you guys want to put your hands together.
Good evening. Okay.
Just click when you're ready to go to the next slide, Richard.
Okay. So they can see that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and they can see me too. Wow, the world we live in, it's great. So I'm Richard Tizzano. I'm an attorney, and I focus my practice in the area of long-term care, estate planning. I do some guardianships for seniors and young people who are disabled, turning 18. They need to be in a guardianship. I really enjoy what I do. I didn't always enjoy what I did or what I do. It was depressing at one point because people would come one after the other in an emergency. Somebody they loved or were helping through life was at the hospital or headed to the nursing home or in the nursing home, and they were desperate to know how do they pay for this and what could they do. And so I tried to figure out how I could get people to come and see me sooner, because if they could see me sooner, they could do some planning and maybe avoid the light at the end of the tunnel, which really was a train coming at them. And so I started doing seminars. I do regular seminars in our area here, and I travel places to do seminars as well. So if you like what you hear, you're certainly welcome to invite me. Jason already showed you the book. So the book is Accidental Safari. It's a guide for navigating the challenges that come with aging. And the old guy on the elephant is not me. Okay. So the book tells my story. I was born and raised in Queens, New York. We have some people out there from the East, it looks like, on the list, and nice talking to you. But I was an only child raised in Queens, New York, and early one Sunday morning, my mom got sick, and my dad woke me up and said that the ambulance was there taking my mom to the hospital. She was just 42 years old and was suffering a stroke. And she came home about 4 months later, and my dad and I proceeded to take care of her. She was paralyzed on the right side and a wheelchair the rest of her life. She lived for about 20 years like that, and we cared for her. Didn't know how to do it. We just kind of figured it out as we went along. We lived in a second floor apartment, 21 steps up, and we stayed in that apartment for years. I often wonder why we never moved, and because probably nobody ever suggested it and we just didn't think about it. So my book has a lot of stories of my clients. I suggest a lot of things that people need to consider as you age and as you prepare for the long-term care issues that might be coming ahead. Oh, there you go. Look at that. Great shot of the book there. It's available on Amazon, by the way, $15 on Amazon. So how do we plan? There's a process in long-term care planning, and the whole issue usually starts with a health issue. And it can be a medical emergency, heart attack or a stroke. It can be a fall, some kind of accident that happens that sends you into care, or maybe some progressive disease like Parkinson's or dementia, Alzheimer's, that you're on the road and you're heading toward the emergency room, or some kind of transition that's caused by a health issue. And then that health issue from the hospital or the rehab center, it becomes a housing issue, and where you started living at home and were happy, and then the health issue came or the accident came. Now all of a sudden you're having to figure out, where do I need to be? What works best for me? Can I go back home? If I go back home, do I need a caregiver, or do I have to stay in a rehab facility for a while? I'll go to assisted living or memory care. Or so how is that all going to work? And so what started out as a health issue and then became a housing issue now is a financial issue. How do I pay for this? Because typically what started out or prior to the health issue, you had a certain budget you were living on and finances were going out the door a certain amount, and all of a sudden that number has changed and it's likely gone up quite a bit. And so then and you might be in a situation where you need a whole lot more help than you had before, and you need people who are legally authorized to help you. You might need somebody who can coordinate care with your doctor and other caregivers, and the HIPAA Health Privacy Act might limit the ability of people to organize that stuff for you, so they need to be legally authorized to do that. And the best way to do that would be certainly through a power of attorney. If you can go home, maybe you have some steps in front of your house, you need a ramp built, or you need some other modifications to the home. It would be nice if somebody was authorized to hire a contractor and write checks and get that all done. It's really helpful if that person or those persons you are authorizing to do that know who they are. They're not just people you told your attorney to put in the document. So if something happens unforeseen down the road, there's somebody that can be called, but it's helpful if you have that discussion, and the person you're naming can have some idea what your anticipation or expectation might be of what they could do for you and how you might want things done. And so it's great to have those people identified and informed, and you build a team, so to speak, so you know how you can all work together. And so this afternoon, I hope we can identify what some of the pieces might be for this long-term care, and identifying those issues and how to best address them and put those pieces together. So here we go. Most people would say that they want to stay at home if given the choice. And you can get all kinds of services in your house these days. You know, everything from personal care services, somebody coming in, cooking meals or Meals on Wheels, or some other kind of assistance at home. Sometimes it's paid for from community services or nonprofits or charities. Sometimes maybe it's a government program, or you have some insurance that covers it, or ultimately out of pocket. You can pay for anything you may need to provide that care at home. You can even die at home with hospice, a great organization that provides those kinds of care. And most people say, if given the choice, they want to stay home. They want to get the care at home. And one of the reasons they say that is they think it's going to be less expensive at home, but that's not necessarily the case. So I've listed here the different levels of care that you can receive. And home care, as I said, I think people think is their first choice, and maybe they're least expensive because maybe the home is paid for, and they think, well, I can just get some additional services I need. But just think about it. If you're at the rehab facility and you get to go home, but you need to have somebody who can come and maybe just help you get out of bed in the morning, give you a shower, change you, help you get dressed, and give you your breakfast, maybe morning medications, a couple hours in the morning, And then in the evening, the reverse of that, somebody who can give you dinner, evening meds, help you get back into bed. So 4 hours a day. In our area, in-home care provided by a care agency, licensed, bonded, and insured, is about $30 an hour. You can check in your area, see what it is, get an idea of what the hourly rate might be. But it's about $30 an hour here. So 4 hours a day, we're looking at over $100 a day for just 4 hours of care a day. That's $3,000, over $3,000 a month, just for a few hours a day. So what happens if you have a physical ailment where you need more care than that, more time? You may not need necessarily somebody caring for you all the time, but it may not be safe for you to be home alone. And so you need somebody who's going to be there during the day, maybe until your loved one returns home in the evening. And so that's your 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day at $30 an hour. That's $300 a day just for those 10 hours during the day. You know, that's $10,000 a month, more or less. What if you're a wanderer? You have some dementia issues and you're not safe at home alone because nobody knows, you know, if you're going to be messing with the stove or just wandering or in the middle of the night wandering. So you need somebody who's there 24 hours a day. So we're, you know, $15,000, $20,000 a month it could be. So it's not necessarily the least expensive way to get care at home. It may be your priority. You may want to be there, but it could be financially prohibitive at some point. Okay, and then the next level is independent living. So that's a little more organized. You maybe still be living alone in a bungalow or in a small home in a tight community. It can be naturally occurring. That's a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community, or it can be an intentional community where you're paying for the opportunity to have maybe a dining area down in another building or in a separate part of the building you're in. Or a activities director, or they take organized trips. And so that's probably twice as expensive than the natural occurring would be the organized one. And it depends on your area, of course, what you might pay. It's probably twice what, you know, if you're living in a 2-bedroom apartment, having an intentional independent living community is probably going to be twice, at least twice what the rent might be in the area. Assisted living, that's a more formal level of care. Most people or many people go into assisted living because they need that medicine management, and maybe you've been helping somebody and you're messing with the little plastic things that have the, you know, the lids that pop open, SMTW. And so you arrange it all and you leave it with the person you love, and then you come back a few days later and, you know, there's some pills that are gone and they're not supposed to be gone, and another one down the road is supposed to be there and it's not. And so, you know, you can actually rent or buy these computer programmable discs that you can put all the medications in for a week or 2 or 3, and then it'll pop open. The lid pops open at a certain time, you know, your 8 a.m. meds, and the alarm goes off and you can take out the little pill, and then at noon it'll pop open, and they even have them set up so that you'll get a text message on your phone if your loved one doesn't take their medication, and so then you have to call them and get them with the program. So that can only go so far, and maybe at some point you're ready to take them down to visit the assisted living facility. I really encourage people to visit facilities near you. You may know somebody there you can go visit and you know, brighten their day. And they usually will feed you. So you want to go around dinner time because they want to show off how good their meals are. They pay a lot of money typically to try to get the public aware that they're there and get you in. So if you go in, they're happy to give you a meal and show you how good their cook is. And you probably want to visit more than one if you have a few in your area, because then you get to compare. And knowledge is power. And so if you have the awareness of how things were working down there, maybe one place feel better about one place than the other, then you can be more comfortable about it, less fearful, because you're aware of it. And then you can ask informative questions. You know, how big are the rooms I can expect? You know, what's the cost? In our area, assisted living entry level is probably for a single person about $4,500. You could add a partner for or a spouse for about $1,000, and then it goes, depending on the level of assistance you need, it goes up from there. Most assisted living in our area, excuse me, most assisted living facilities in our area have a memory care floor or a wing or an adjacent building because they're licensed under the same system with the state. And memory care is just that, your people are in there because they need assistance. They're not safe being alone, and they need help remembering, take their medications or to eat or to be safe. And it's probably about $1,000 more a month than the assisted living care. It's you enter in at about $1,000 more than you would at the entry level, and care goes up from there. I've had clients in assisted living or memory care paying, $8, 10, even $12,000 a month for that kind of care. We have adult family homes in our area. Adult family home is a renovated home type building. They're licensed for only up to 6 adults in an adult family home. And it's a nice, less formal living situation. The people in the adult family home are certainly available or able to help with the running of the home. Some people can help with the cooking, and so they have typically at least one staff member on for the 6 residents that are allowed. And during the day, there's usually 2 staff members. So it's a great ratio of staff to residents. And the cost is for adult family home is about the same as assisted living. Nursing home is the highest level of care, and in our area, it's probably between $10,000 and $13,000 a month. Provides the highest level of care. There's many continuing care communities, and that's a campus that has all of the different levels of care on the same campus. So you can enter into independent living if you need some assisted living or some assistance. You can get that in your independent apartment or bungalow, wherever you may be living, or you can move into the section where they have assisted living. And if your level of care rises, you can get more assistance where you are, or move to the nursing care section. Most continuing care communities have a buy-in. They require that you put a sum down, and it's all over the board depending on the community and the amenities that they have. I've seen it as low as a buy-in of $75,000 and as high as over $1 million. And so it's important you understand what happens to that money once you go in. If you decide you don't like it, want to leave, do you get it back, or do you get a percentage back? Does it grow, or is it diminished over time when you die? Down the road, does your estate get the money that's left, and how is that determined? And so it's careful that you go over all of those agreements that are going to be pushed across the table on all of these different levels of care. Make sure that you understand those documents. You might want to pick them up a day or two before you actually are doing the signing, so you can have them looked over by a professional, someone you trust, who may have had the opportunity to look over many of these documents before, and they would know what to look for and be able to explain it to you, answer any questions that you have. Okay, so the health issue leads to the housing issue, leads to the financial issue. So it's important that you have a plan, and you understand what your plan is, and that you can determine if your plan is sustainable and how sustainable it might be. So how long it's going to last, and it isn't necessarily just a financial issue. It's sustainable at this one facility because it costs $8,000 a month. With the money I have, I can stay so long, and then at that point I'm going to run out of money, or I'm going to have to go to a lower cost facility. It's not just thinking that way. It's trying to look at an overall plan. Like, I want to stay home as long as I can walk the dog, or I want to stay home as long as I can continue to go up and down the stairs, or as long as I can do my own toileting, or something that's more aesthetic or more practical, not just financial. And so you need to think through that and have those discussions so that your family knows what's helpful to you And I try to be, people come in for a consult, and if there's an identifying issue, they can see that their health failing, or they have a diagnosis. And I try to have a loving, straightforward conversation of, you're here with your spouse or your children who love you, and they're concerned. We're trying to come up with a long-term plan, and your health is failing. You're at a point in your life where you're able to do less, each year than you did the year before. At some point, it might be best for you to go into a facility because it could be safer for you, and you need to have that conversation with your loved ones about when would that be okay for them to help you do that. You might, in your illness, you might get to a place where you can't make that decision anymore, and so they need to know how that decision could be made. And I've had them say, well, who can help you make that decision? I had one sitting in the room with the couple, and then their 2 adult children. One was a doctor, and he pointed his son, the doctor, and he said, when Mike says that I need to be in a facility, then that'll be okay. And I've had people say, well, I want to stay at home as long as I can, and they know those are my wishes. And then I've had people say, well, I promised my mom she would never go to a nursing home, and I acknowledge that. That's great, but sometimes life gets out of your hands, and you will do your best to do that. But I've had people that in tears because they just couldn't. They were at the end of their rope, and their mom needed a level of care they couldn't, and safety that they couldn't provide at home, and so things needed to change. So what are the issues for sustainability? And if it's financial, or there's other resources that can be brought in to extend the sustainability, it's helpful if you can identify that. And then what is plan B? If you reach a place where it's not sustainable any longer, do you have a plan B, and is plan B sustainable? And if so, for how long? So I like the story. I had a client come in. He was an older gentleman, and I introduced myself to him, and he said he was there for his mom. And I said, well, how old is your mom? And he said, well, she's in her mid-90s. And so I asked, well, how can I help? And he said, well, I don't live with my mom. She lives alone, but she gets 24-hour care, and she's concerned that this house she's lived in almost all of her life, that she might not be able to stay there for the rest of her life, and she might run out of funds and have to move out. And so we talked about that, how much money she had, what her income was, what her expenses were. And he thought she might run out of money in 4 or 5 years. And I looked at what the resources were, and I said, well, it looks like you're right, about right. And he said, well, is there anything else we can do? And so I thought, I said, well, at that point, the only asset she would have left is the house. Maybe at that point she could get a reverse mortgage, and then she would get about half of the equity of the house, and she could use that in addition to her income to pay for her care. Her name would still be on the deed to the house, and so that would give her probably, how much was the house worth? And he told me, and we figured out about what the loan amount would be, and she could probably stay there another 4 or 5 years. And so then he's writing that down, and then he says, well, what would we do next? And so I'm thinking, well, she's getting pretty old, but what would we do next? Well, at that point, you probably would have to sell the house. But I had this idea, maybe the realtor could list it as for sale, looking for an investor to buy. And so someone would buy the house and lease it back to your mom. So your mom now would get all of the proceeds of the sale of the house. Half of it or a little more would go to pay off the reverse mortgage. And she'd be left with this pot of money, about 40-45% of what the house is worth, after the mortgage was paid off, and she could continue to stay there. She'd have to pay rent now, though, which she didn't have before. So she'd have rent and the cost of care and the cost of the house and all. So that might give her another 3 or 4 years. Anyway, unless she lived past 108 or so, she probably would get to stay at home. But he did ask me, well, is there anything else we can do? And I thought, well, if all the assets are gone, what you could do is talk to the local nursing home and see if you got the in-home care from them, because they had an in-home care program where you could rent in-home care. If you got the care over the years from them, they could assure you that when she got to the place where she totally ran out of money, and if she still needed care, and then she could go into their facility And under Medicaid, Medicaid's a federal program that pays for care, and so since she would be out of resources, she could qualify for Medicaid, and so she would have some assurance that even though at some point at 108 or so she might not be able to stay at her home, she could still be at a place where she would be safe and receive care. So I say all that to say that taking the time to work through in a plan, even when it may seem like it's hopeless sometimes, it provides some hope, because you see, well, wow, there are some things we can do, and just having discussed it gives me a little more peace that it can be okay. Because I find that people are frozen. Two things that prevent them from making decisions is that either they are in denial that there is a problem until there's no option but to accept it, or they're frozen because they are not feel like they don't know what all the options are, and because they don't know what the options are, they're afraid that they're going to make a wrong choice or make a choice and then find out down the road that, gee, it would have been so much better if I had done this or that. So if you're gathering information, that's going to give you some confidence in the choice you make. And if you're trying to be true to yourself or true to the circumstances around you, then that's going to help as well. So long-term care insurance. So this is Long-Term Care Awareness Month, and so one of the issues that you can do to help you address long-term care costs is by having long-term care insurance. Now, I have the old kind of long-term care insurance. That is, it's like car insurance. I pay every month. I've had it for years, and I'm going to continue to pay every month, and then hope that I never use my insurance. I don't go to bed at night feeling really sad that I didn't get to use my car insurance. So I'm going to die never having gone to the nursing home, not being sad that I didn't get to use my long-term care insurance. But if I need it, I have it. But along the way, I run the risk of getting that letter from the insurance company that says, oh, we're sorry to inform you that we have to raise your premiums. So that's the traditional or the old form, but it covers everything I need covered. So if you have a long-term care policy, pull it out and make sure that it's covering home care. And if it's an older one, the products they sold back then, more than 15 years ago, those products, it was more of a smorgasbord. You could pick some things and leave other things on the table. These days, now long-term care policies cover everything. So it's got, nursing home care, in-home care, and respite care, and assisted living care, and memory care, and I don't care, and it's all daycare. It's all in there. So if you have a newer policy, you don't have to worry. But look to make sure that you understand the coverage you have. Having long-term care insurance protects your assets. And some people, wealthy people who could probably self-insure without a problem, can look at long-term care insurance just as a risk management option. What does it cost, especially with some of these new products that I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, estate plan. When I'm helping people plan for their estate planning, we plan differently together when people have long-term care insurance, because I don't have to consider the threat of long-term care costs to their nest egg and to the assets that they have. So there is a real benefit in that sense. Less than 10% of Americans have long-term care insurance. So if you do have it, just hurt your arm and pat yourself on the back, because that's hopefully a good thing. And like I said, hopefully you never have to use it, but you have it if you don't. Even if you don't, or you have it if you do need to use it. So there's the hybrid, the new kind of policies. There's a hybrid policy and an annuity plans are available. The way that works is at least the hybrid combines long-term care insurance and life insurance. And so when they're combined, if you bought a policy, the illustration I've been given is if a person 60 years old bought a single premium hybrid long-term care policy, you say $100,000 single premium, you are buying with that $100,000 of life insurance. So if you die the next day, your estate would get $100,000 back, but you're also buying a pool of about $400,000 of long-term care insurance. And you can draw from that at about $3,000 a month. And so if you did that at 60 years old, fast forward, now you're 80 years old, you haven't made any claims because you've been healthy, and you haven't paid any premiums because you've owned the policy, you bought it at the beginning. If you died at 80, your estate would still get that $100,000. if you get sick and need care at 80, then that pool of 400,000 has now grown to 800,000, and you can withdraw at 6,000 a month instead of 3,000 a month. So that's what the new hybrid policy. The big difference is, if you die, what you paid for the premiums or in the lump sum single premium comes back to your estate, whereas with the older traditional policy, you just pay every month, and what you paid helps to fund other people who may be in the same pool that you're in, but they actually have a claim, and you can help pay that claim. So long-term care insurance, you should at least price it out and see if that might be something that can fit into your budget and make sense for protecting your assets, or just for protecting you or your family, you and your spouse, for the care needs. Okay, what's next? Well, so let's look at Medicaid. Medicaid is a program that pays for long-term care costs. There is you have to be qualified both financially and medically. So if you need assistance with at least 3 activities of daily living, or you have some cognitive impairment where you can't remember to take your medications or to eat or to do other important things, then you could qualify for Medicaid. And for a married couple, Medicaid's a federal program, so it's similar in all states. It's not exactly the same as the way I'm going to explain it, because the federal government allows the states to administer the program however they want, because states contribute matching funds. And so the way I'm going to tell you how it works, at least from the detail perspective, is here in the state of Washington. But you can contact a local elder law attorney. You go to the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys.org, NAELA, NAELA.org, and you can find a local elder law attorney, and they can meet with you and go over all of this stuff, including how Medicaid particularly works in your state. But in our state, the person who needs care has to cannot have more than $2,000 in assets, and then the well spouse can have all of these other assets, and I'm not going to go into all of the details, but it's possible to move assets between spouses without a penalty, to get one spouse who would qualify financially for Medicaid and have all the other assets up to the limit of between 53 and 120,000 go to, actually I think it's 125 now, can go to the well spouse. And the well spouse can actually shelter assets above that. And then the single person, you don't have the flexibility of having a spouse to move assets to, and so the single spouse can qualify having less than $2,000, would have to have spent down to that amount, and a house and a car and a prepaid funeral, and they can have these other things. But when they die, whatever assets they own would be subject to a payback to Medicaid, or Medicaid would put a lien or a creditor's claim into their estate. And so for many, many people in the United States, Medicaid is their safety net. And so they haven't been able to afford long-term care insurance. They're not a veteran, and maybe don't have a disability that would allow them to go to a veteran's home under VA benefits, and they're out of funds. Then Medicaid is going to be their safety net and pay for their care. And so it's a fallback for many people. But because of the flexibility for eligibility for spouses, many people plan, and in my book I talk about how to consider, if your plan is Medicaid, how to position yourself legally for Medicaid eligibility. And so many people do that, and I find that people who have assets maybe under $400,000 or so, and they have a home, and so they're most concerned that, gee, if I get sick and it starts to get very expensive for my care, my spouse might be left destitute. It might eat up all of our nest egg, and then it's certainly, as I've indicated here, the house is exempt and some cash is exempt, but I want to be sure that I figured that out and that my spouse doesn't end up being destitute. So Medicaid is a safety net for many people, but not everyone would want to qualify for Medicaid. And even in some states, in Washington, we're fortunate because most all the facilities accept nursing home facilities accept people in either private pay or Medicaid, and there's no differentiation on the care, the level of care. The people who work in the facilities, they don't know whether someone is private pay or someone is receiving care by Medicaid paying their bill. And so we don't have a different Medicaid building or Medicaid floor. And I understand some states are like that, but it's not like that in Washington. So you qualifying for Medicaid does not, or looking for Medicaid to pay for your costs of care does not affect the level of care you would receive. But here's some reasons for not pursuing Medicaid. So maybe you have a large 401k or IRA. So in the slide before, I showed you that the well spouse, you could shift the assets to the well spouse, and there's a 5-year look back period for that. For transfers, they ask on the application, have you made any gifts or transfers in the last 5 years? And but there's no penalty for transfers between spouses, so you can transfer immediately and immediately thereafter apply for Medicaid. So you could do that, but maybe the spouse who needs care is the one who has a large IRA, and in order to shift all the assets to the well spouse, so the spouse in care could qualify for Medicaid, you have a large IRA to transfer, and so it's going to be tax prohibitive. It's going to generate, if you have a $400,000 IRA, you're going to shift over to the well spouse. That's $150,000 or so of income tax to pay, and so in that situation, you could pay for well over a year of care just from the income tax. And so if you have a large IRA, a large 401k, you're not going to be cashing that out to apply for Medicaid. You're going to be earning money tax-free inside the vehicle, going to be pulling money out as you need it, plus your income coming in, and typically be able to pay for care without significantly eroding your nest egg. If you have long-term care insurance, you're likely not going to need Medicaid. If you have a large annual income for whatever sources, and that is able to pay the cost of care, you're not going to pursue Medicaid as an option. And if income exceeds care, so if your income, typically the person in care is going to turn over their income towards the facility to pay towards their cost of care. Medicaid would make up the difference. But if your income exceeds the cost of care, there's no difference for Medicaid to make up. And so you wouldn't even qualify for Medicaid in that situation. And people who have larger nest eggs or exceptional income could choose to self-insure and just make those payments themselves. Okay, so the legal solutions, we talked about some financial positioning. The legal solutions are basically you want to be sure that you have a will in place and you have powers of attorney for assets and powers of attorney for health care, and a directive to physicians. In other states, they call it a living will. In Washington, we call it a directive to physicians. And so those are essential documents where you've identified those people who are going to help you through life. You've identified people who can take over after you're gone and manage your assets and gather them together and distribute them. So what steps do you need to take at this point? Well, there you go. You can consult with an elder law attorney in your area. You might want to learn about what other risks might be available, the details of qualifying for Medicaid and other issues there, and developing a life care plan that's going to address the issues in your family. Going to at least put down on paper what you think you want and how that's going to work. And I think for a lot of people, as you are thinking about this, you want to move toward a situation where those people who know you and love you, if you have a huge family and they're all caregiver type people, you're going to look to them to be those providers for care. If you have a large family and they just kind of are nice to each other, but they're not really a caregiver family, then you need to be a realist and not in denial. And you need to put yourself in a situation where you can lean on professionals to do your finances or to do care or risk management. Maybe you want to hire a geriatric care manager and include that requirement in your power of attorney for healthcare, that your agent should have a geriatric care manager visit you quarterly or weekly or depending on the circumstances, so that professionals are feeding in and taking responsibility and beginning to do those things, so it's not a burden on your family, but your family is there then just to oversee how that stuff works. So you need to have a plan like that, that identifies or is realistic as far as what your family can do for the care that may be ahead. Because about 70% of people over 70 years old are going to be, before they die, in a situation where they need some kind of assistance, whether it's just the family helping out or full-blown nursing care. And so realistically, you need to say, well, what would that be like, and have those kinds of discussions with your family. Oh, do I go back now? Okay. Go back. Okay. So I guess we're going to do questions.
All right, let's see. Let me do some question and answer here.
Did we get any questions?
I have traditional LTC plan. Is it advisable to look into converting to a hybrid plan?
Oh, great question. Okay. Can everybody see that question, or do I need? Okay. Okay. So it says, I have a traditional long-term care plan. Is it advisable to look into converting to a hybrid plan? I certainly would. I have the traditional plan, and then I had a whole life insurance policy from the same company. And when I heard about the new plan, I contacted them and asked them if I could do that. Could I merge those two and come up with one? It made a whole lot of sense to me. But the short answer is they said no. They wouldn't do it. But the reason was because they said I was too old. So I was maybe too, I don't know, but they said no. But I would ask the company to do, if you could do that, and what that would look like cost-wise, because there's a lot of cash value in your life insurance if it's whole life. And if it's not, if you're just talking about converting your plan as it is, and you don't have a life insurance to pool into it, you're probably in a position where you're going to be looking at doing it as a new policy. And so then your age is going to be dependent on what your age is as to whether the numbers are going to work for you. They say once you pass 60 and 60 years old, the cost really starts to escalate as you pass 60. Okay, any other questions out there? Okay.
Maybe give just one more minute.
Okay, we're available to answer your questions, so type them on in.
I was talking to a friend of mine, Richard, today, that specializes in long-term care insurance, and he was saying that to estimate how much your premiums were going to be for a traditional policy, you take whatever the dollar amount of insurance you would have. So if it's 500,000 times 1%, you might be looking at $5,000 of premium cost. Like, that's a way to estimate the cost of the insurance. If you have $300,000 of insurance, it might cost $3,000 a year. It's, of course, dependent on your age. In this particular case, there's a couple that was in their 50s that was looking into it. So something for people to consider.
Now, is that life insurance we're talking about?
No, that's just traditional long-term care insurance.
Oh, okay.
The amount of insurance. Here's another question for you. Can you discuss underwriting for long-term care insurance?
Okay, well, I can tell you what I know, which is just minimal from my experience. I don't sell the insurance, but so it's like any other insurance. They want to sell it to you when you don't think you need it, and they're looking at so your age and your health. I had a lady come in. She was in her early 60s, and she had an excellent policy that she had taken out over 30 years before. She was 29 years old when she took out the long-term care insurance policy. It was an excellent policy, and she was complaining that her premiums went up from $121 a quarter to $151. So they went up $20 per quarter. So if you have long-term care insurance, you know that you're probably paying twice that monthly, or at least that monthly. But I asked her, why did you get long-term care insurance when you were 29? Did you have Alzheimer's in your family or something you're trying to protect against? And she said, no, she just worked in a company and they would bring in these different speakers, and one person came and talked about it. And so she bought it. So I think that kind of goes to show you, they want to sell it to you when you're younger, and they'll they'll give you a break a good deal on the price because you're healthy. And when you stop to think about it, the younger you buy it, the better off you are, because you're going to be covered longer for less money. And if you have some event, a battle with cancer, or some other medical issue that comes along which might make you uninsurable, then you can't be covered after that. So if long-term possibility of long-term care insurance for you makes any sense at all, you want to go sooner and get the numbers right away, because the numbers are going to go nowhere but up as you age, and the possibility of having some sickness is going to increase as you age. So hope that helps. Okay. What's the best way about finding the best long-term insurance policy for me? Is it best to put assets in a trust as we go? Okay, 2 questions. Okay, so the best way, well, I think you want to ask around for people who have it. You want to look up some companies and the standings that the companies have. And then you want to get bids from, I would say, at least 3 different companies. Make sure that they're both talking about apples and apples, and not apples and oranges. And then compare and take the different policies then to someone who's not selling you the policy. So you could take it to a long-term care attorney, you could take it to an investment advisor who has dealt with them and seen them. But I think that would be the best way to find a policy that works for you. And certainly if you have some family illnesses like dementia or Parkinson's, some kind of things that are in your family, you certainly want to check that out sooner rather than later, get the best price before something happens. Okay, is it best to put assets in a trust as we age to prevent the state from attaining our assets, the house? If we become ill as we age, excuse me, I'm not sure how a trust works, but understand it may be beneficial. Okay, so that's a possibility. Oh, great, okay. So if you're married, you don't really have to do anything until one spouse needs care. And you can have an estate plan that says, when I die, any assets I control go into a trust for the benefit of my spouse. So that transfer is made because of death. So there's no gifting connected with that. There's no penalty for Medicaid eligibility purposes. So that's part of what an estate plan could look like if you're thinking that Medicaid qualification is really where, with the assets we have or don't have, that we would be looking. So that's part of positioning yourself for Medicaid. Once one spouse has a diagnosis that is headed in a direction that makes, if you're being a realist, you're saying, well, at some point my spouse, or if you're the spouse who has the diagnosis, at some point, if something happens to my spouse, I couldn't live alone. Or if something happens to my spouse, they couldn't live alone. That's the point where you really need to come up with the plan. And the plan may be to shift the assets to the well spouse at that time. If all the assets are shifted to the well spouse, there's no penalty for Medicaid eligibility purposes. And if the well spouse dies suddenly, and their will says, instead of the I love you will, when I die, everything's going to go to my spouse, that you could have a will that leaves everything to the kids, or it leaves it into a special needs trust for the benefit of your spouse. So if I'm the well spouse, we've shifted all the assets to me so that my spouse can qualify for Medicaid, and then I die suddenly, my will is going to put everything into a trust for the benefit of my spouse who's in care. It's not going to go to my spouse and kick them off care, but it's going to create this special needs trust as a safety net for my spouse who's in a facility under Medicaid. And then if they need anything, Medicaid's not going to provide for, dental or, additional caregivers or whatever it might be, can come out of that trust. And then when my spouse dies in care, whatever's left in the trust at that point would be distributed to the kids. So if you're a single person and you're going to make a gift of assets into a trust, that's how Medicaid would look at it, like you are making a gift to fund that trust. So that's going to create a 5-year period of ineligibility. So if you think you're going to be healthy for the next 5 years and you want to see your kids end up with a house, you could do that. You could say, okay, I'm going to gift my house to you, please don't kick me out. But you could have them put it into a special needs trust for you. You made the gift to them, starts the 5-year clock ticking. They take the gift, they put it into a irrevocable special needs trust for your benefit. Then it's not subject to their creditors. You're kind of protected, they're protected, and the clock is ticking on the 5 years. If something happens within the 5 years, they either have to pay for your care to get you past the 5-year period, or they need to give you the house back or give you back the assets. But typically, if it's liquid assets, the assets in the trust would be used to pay for your care to get you past that 5-year period. A lot of this is in the book, so you can pick that up if I'm kind of barking around the right tree for you. Do any types of policies allow you to pay family members for helping out, or do they always need a licensed caregiver, and how do these policies compare in price? I don't know how they would compare in price, but I have seen both kinds of policies. I have seen policies that even pay for a training course for a family member to be trained so that they can be your caregiver, and then you can use your funds to pay them. And I have seen policies that specifically do not allow family members to care for you. I've never seen a policy that allows your spouse to be paid to pay for you. I guess the presumption is that for sickness and health, you're in there together. So what kinds of medical conditions could make you uninsurable for long-term care insurance? A lot. Yeah, they tried it. They're pretty selective. And if you've had something in the past, they're going to look at your medical history. A lot of that carries forward, and it's not necessarily just 5 years since you had cancer or whatever, but you need to apply. If you think that product could be helpful to you, you need to apply in a couple of different places. And I've heard, some really silly reasons why people say they have been turned down. But the companies have a product that they want to sell, so they're not going to turn everybody down. So you may end up having to pay a little higher premium, but that's why shop around and test the waters. I'm trying to encourage my children in their 50s to look into long-term care insurance, but they think the premiums are too high. How do you assess when it might not be necessary to consider long-term care insurance? Well, I think I identified a lot of those reasons, so if you have a culture in your family where you're going to care for each other, and certainly some different ethnic groups that immigrate to the U.S., they're a caregiving culture, and the elders always get cared for at home, or almost always. Our culture, since the 60s, with the passage of the Medicaid Act under Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society, that's when the government said, we will pay for the care of anyone who runs out of money in a nursing home. That was when Medicaid was created. And so that started the whole nursing home industry, because you could open a nursing home and provide these services to people who hopefully could pay for them. And when their money ran out, then the government would pay for them. And so that whole industry started. And so our whole culture kind of accepted that, and embraced it. And so in our culture, it is a very prominent option of, if you need care, you go to care outside the home. And whereas in many other cultures, it's not. But if your family is such, and I see a lot of families like that, and it makes sense, the kids live nearby, and a couple of them are nurses or whatever, EMTs, so they're people who know how to and have made their living caring for others, and so that's part of the plan, and that makes sense. There's some helpful exceptions to the Medicaid rules. So if you have a child who has lived in your home with you to provide care and to help you for 2 years prior to you going into care, under some pretty broad options that child could receive, you could make a gift of your home to that child who's lived in your home with you for at least 2 years. And so if you're going to leave the home to go into care outside the home, you could gift that home to a child who's lived there for 2 years to care for you. So that's an exception that's out there to encourage families to help each other to reduce or to extend the time you get to stay at home, reduce your time then in a facility. A lot of good questions. Wow. Yeah. Does it? Good. Hope that was all helpful to you folks. I sure enjoyed the opportunity, and you're welcome to email me directly if you have some specific issues that come up. Like I said, you're best connecting with a local elder law attorney in your area, but I'm happy to I answer all my own emails, and so thank you. And if I could leave you maybe with just some words of encouragement, there's always hope. You know, God guides the journey, and we're all on this journey. It's our own journey, but we get to touch other lives as we go along. And never give up hope. And I see as the gray tsunami of baby boomers increases, I see the real hope coming from people learning to love your neighbor and to reach out and help the person who's closest to you, or God brings in contact with you. Help that person, reach out and touch that person, encourage them, and do what you can. God bless you. Thank you.